Hey, this is Sky. Welcome to my YouTube channel. It's Monday, Mafia Monday. Let's jump right into it. California Gangsters. We're going scene by scene through all 3 novels that I wrote. This is the first one. Let's pick up where we left off. I got Mr. Snubby, fully loaded, of course, with some Hollow Point Plus P 38 special bullets. Set your mood right. Let's get into some Mafia stories. Our main character, Simon Castro. Young Simon, he had just been made into the Mafia, a family business. His uncle and his father are both made members in the LA crime family, and he just had his ceremony. He's at a party at the boss's house, Tommy Guns Pagoda, one of the more famous bosses that's ever been in LA. And he's old but well respected, and they're at his mansion, his compound, for a big party, holiday party. The Syndicate is there. Simon asked about the Syndicate in the last episode. You can go watch that on Monday. But let's just jump into it, get a little further down the road in this story. This scene is a little bit longer than the last scene we read last week. So let's get into this. My grandfather caught eyes with me as he made his way around the room. He came over to congratulate me on my successful induction into the family. He was tall and skinny. He had large, strong hands that grabbed me like vice grips as he hugged me. My grandfather said, "Hey, Simon, congratulations, big guy. Wow, look how big your muscles have gotten. Hey, someone get my grandson a plate of food before he passes out from starvation. I bet a guy like you has to eat an entire chicken every 20 minutes just to keep those muscles looking that way." I smiled wide from ear to ear and replied, "Hello, Grandpa. You're looking healthy as usual. It's great to see you." He turned to my Uncle Frank, and his expression changed. His tone changed. Without missing a beat, my grandfather said, "Are you drunk already, Fatso? Put that glass down and drink some water. Show some respect for Tommy, your boss, sitting right over there. Button up your shirt, you look like a poor slob. Even the East Coast guys are laughing at you." My grandfather's face went from bright red and his nostrils flared like a bull. Frank turned his head to me and stuck his tongue out in disgust at the treatment by his father. Then he silently stumbled off like a grumpy, drunk teenager as he buttoned up his shirt and tucked it in properly. My grandfather grabbed my arm and stood close to me so we could talk. We chatted about the same stuff that we always talked about when we hung out together, mostly sports and gambling. It felt really nice to have him there with me on my big night. My father, with his eternal brown nose, caught on to Frank's drunkenness. He gave his brother a scolding in front of Tommy to score some points. But the family Don was not paying attention to the Castro brothers at that moment, so my father gave up on yelling. My grandfather always acted like one of the guys wherever he was, a trait which everyone enjoyed about him. He took a glass of whiskey from a waitress, slammed it back, drinking half the bottle in one gulp. He passed it to me. He passed the bottle to me, and then said in his joyful tone, "Is this a gangster party, or is this a sausage party? Hey, Tommy, where's all the pussy at?" Tommy Guns Pagoda was sitting in his chair a few feet from us with some of the East Coast Mafia and chatting about politics. He looked over at my grandfather and smiled wide to acknowledge the request. Tommy snapped his fingers and 2 men opened the large French doors on the end of the patio. A group of about 15 to 20 bikini models came out and they were dancing around to the music. These women were stunning. They were not the whores that Frank owned. They were not whores at all. These were the most beautiful women that I had ever seen in my entire damn life. They danced around the patio like sex goddesses, hypnotizing every man who gazed upon them. These bikini girls had been carefully instructed by someone in charge because they were making sure to give their attention to the older bosses first. I sat in the back corner of the patio, eating the plate of food my grandfather had ordered for me, and laughing at the wild scene of old men and hot models in between bites. My grandfather had two bikini girls dancing erotically around him, taking up all his attention. He was staring at their bodies like a kid in a candy store with a huge smile on his face at the special treatment. I don't know why I chose that moment to ask this question. But I leaned over and said, "Hey, Grandpa." I asked Uncle Frank about something, and I still don't understand. I'm a made man now. I want to know what's up with the syndicate. My grandfather went from laughing to deadly serious. His demeanor transformed instantly from a bright red of embarrassment to a pale white of surprise. He waved his hand to brush the woman away, and his assistant stepped forward from the shadows to politely shuffle the dancing beauty onto the next boss. He leaned in and replied, "Let's step out by the pool, where we can talk openly." We walked down the staircase from the patio, taking a small path over to the pool area. There was a light drizzle in the air, misting us as we stood by Tommy's Olympic-size black-bottom pool. Skinny, black-suited syndicate security clones walked the lawn, as well as the perimeter of the property over by the hills, armed and ready for any threat. My grandfather's personal assistant kept his pace about 6 feet behind us. He was trained to stay just out of earshot, but close enough to spring into action when he was needed. My grandfather said, "I guess you're ready to hear about the biggest idea that I ever came up with in my entire life, huh?" I eagerly replied, "Yes, sir, of course. I'm dying to know. What's the deal?" My grandfather said, "Simon, first of all, I don't call it the syndicate. I call it the company. It was originally based on the model of the commission back east. The company is a corporation of gangsters." I replied, "I was thinking it was just like the commission in that maybe you were similar to Lucky Luciano." My grandfather smiled at the comparison. He said, "Lucky was a great man. The company is a collection of different ethnic mobs who would have otherwise been mortal enemies in Los Angeles and were for many years. Whereas the commission, albeit similar, limits itself to being exclusively for Italian members, specifically Cosa Nostra. Like our City of Angels, the company has a diversity which proudly reflects our community as a whole. The first thing we make sure to teach every out-of-town gangster who comes out here to set up shop is to never forget that this ain't New York. We do things differently in Los Angeles." I replied, "Right, that's what Frank was telling me. I don't know if he was supposed to be talking about that stuff. Please, I love my Uncle Frank. Don't get so angry with him, and don't get him in trouble for telling me about the syndicate." My grandfather replied, "Little Frankie means well, even though he's fat and stupid. It's Tony, your father, that I keep my eye on. I've always watched him like an eagle. He's my oldest son, and I love him, but he was always a selfish little bully who would do anything to get his way. Your Uncle Frank looks up to his brother, but was never really able to stand up for himself." I laughed and said, "My father definitely seems to have his own agenda, that's for sure." My grandfather continued as we walked slowly. He said, "You see, Simon, the board of directors seats the Italian Mafia, the Jewish Mafia, the Mexican Mafia, and of course my downtown mob, the DTGs, the Downtown Gangsters, being the oldest gang in Los Angeles. Each chair was held by one of my oldest friends, and we all had an equal vote on all company decisions, as well as receiving a very comfortable share of the profits. As a collective group, we invested in mutually beneficial projects, legit businesses, as well as illegal rackets of every variety. For decades, we have successfully run California in this manner. We've done this since the early 1930s. The company calls the shots on the streets, not guys like Frank or your father. The board of directors is who calls the shots. I replied, well, what about the Chinese? They have a pretty big operation. Why didn't they end up on the board of directors? My grandfather looked at me with disgust, like he'd just been fed dog shit. And he said, fuck the Chinese and fuck the triads. Simon, you're so naive and young sometimes. You don't even know your own history. Myself, along with the other mobs downtown, came together as a form of survival to protect ourselves from anyone who wanted to take our turf. Those cat eaters are an eternal thorn in our foot. I laughed and replied, they really eat cats? I don't know, Grandpa. I think that's just an urban myth. He stopped walking for a second and turned to me, looking me deep in the eyes and said, between you and me, Simon, I also started this company with my friends so many years ago in order to protect ourselves from another very powerful mob that was taking over everything in sight. They were taking over the whole country. We had to keep the Sicilians in check, or they would turn California into Chicago or New York. You see, my mentor, the greatest man who ever lived, Joseph Arizona, hated the whole idea of an alliance with other ethnic mobs. And this is where I had to turn on my own mentor. It was the hardest thing I ever had to do. We forced him to join. He only joined the board because I pinned him against the wall with no other options. And since that very day that Joseph Arizona was forced to join the syndicate, the LA family has always wanted to tear down what I built. They still want to take over California. Simon, hear me now. We must never let that happen. I laughed and said, really? I thought you were tight with the family. I mean, look how much they respect you. I think you might be a little bit paranoid, Grandpa. My grandfather replied, you're damn right I'm paranoid. But not so much to make me delusional. Back in those days, even though I was running as Joseph's sidekick, he was still a hungry lion who could not be trusted. With my united front of mobs, we kept the Sicilians in line, and as a result, we shared the rackets equally. They would have taken everything, but we didn't let that happen. We kept California in our hands. The Black Hand, the East Coast, they don't want to share nothing. I find that to be a major flaw in their ideology. And that's why I couldn't be a part of Cosa Nostra, and I kept my own mob. I shook my head in amazement and said, wow, well, that's a lot of heavy politics. Imagine if you'd become enemies instead of allies. It's crazy how things work out in life. My grandfather grabbed my arm and looked me deep in the eyes. He replied, Simon, remember what I tell you here tonight. For as long as you live, you are a Castro. You must uphold the integrity of the syndicate, or the company as I call it, no matter what. I said bluntly, well, what's that supposed to mean? I'm just a low-level guy in the LA family. You don't even like the LA family, right? We finished our second lap around the pool. My grandfather replied, someday you will be at the top. Let's go back up to the house now. People still want to talk to me, and I have to make my way around the entire party before it's over. We can talk more about the company at a later point. You're still growing up. You're still learning how to become a man. All right, let's stop here. Thanks for watching.